Hello and welcome. It is Big Talk with Todd and Noah, presented by Xfinity 10G Network, episode number 14. What does that mean? That means the regular season has concluded. Fair work ending.
Yeah.
Todd, that was some stuff.
Oh, it was an incredible weekend. I mean, it's been a fun year all year, but there's something about rivalry week and when rivalry games are played at the end of the year, and especially when the situation, there's impact, as far as the national picture, the national narrative, when there's an impact in that, it makes it even more incredible. And so between Ohio State, Michigan, and the Iron Bowl and the Apple Cup, and I mean, there were just some incredibly dramatic games that had so much importance to them, and really a fun day to be a fan. Since our game was Friday night, it was really fun to be able to take Saturday and just take it all in as a fan.
No, it was awesome. And even that Florida State game to kind of end the day was really a fun one to tie a bow on what was a really impactful day across college football. I think the right place to start is the game because that was how we all started our day on Saturday, and Michigan beating Ohio State. I think we were all curious. Anybody around the college football world, and certainly fans of the sport, were curious what this was going to look like. No Jim Harbaugh, final game he was serving the 3-game suspension. And Michigan, it was a vintage Michigan performance from what we've seen really the last 3 years from that team. The toughness came out, the way they could finish it came out, the extended drives, the running game came out when necessary. J.J. McCarthy made some big-time plays. He had that dot of a throw that was almost an interception that turned into a touchdown. That was wild. But all of it led to a 30-24 win. The entire 110,000 plus tried to storm the field at the Big House. I mean, that was what college football was all about. And for the Big Ten, it was the culmination of another really exciting season.
Yeah, it was a great football game, and I know there's Ohio State fans that are upset and maybe upset with Ryan Day and, whatever, but Ohio State played a heck of a football game, and they called a good game. They played a good game. They were much better and much more competitive in this one than they were the last 2 years, know. But at the end of the day, there were still a couple things that stood out to me. Number one, and this rivalry has been kind of dictated over the last number of years. Whoever wins the rushing battle wins the game. All right. And Michigan outrushed them. It wasn't by as dramatic of a margin as it was in the previous 2 years, but they still outrushed them by about 60 yards. And then who wins the turnover battle? Michigan did not have a turnover, and Kyle McCord had 2 very costly interceptions. The first one gave Michigan a short field and led to the first touchdown. And, of course, the last one sealed the game when he was hit by Jalen Harrell. I mean, the first one was his mistake. The second one, really, I mean, he got hit right as he was throwing the football, and there was no way to get around that. So, but that's what determined the game. And then the third thing to me, Noah, is I was so incredibly impressed by Sharon Moore. I mean, 2 weeks ago when he took over in his first job as the interim head coach at Penn State, he made the very wise decision, realizing they were going to have trouble blocking the pass rushers that Penn State had. And we saw them Friday night on full display. And he said, you know what? We're going to get big and we're going to run the ball at them. And they ended up running the ball 30 times consecutively and won the game. Plus, J.J. McCarthy was a little nicked up, okay? In the game Saturday, the biggest game of the season for both teams, he was very aggressive.
Yeah.
Right? Now, Michigan in the game, they were only 3 of 12 on third down, which is 25%, but 3 for 3 on fourth down. He went for it 3 times on fourth down, successful all 3 times. 2 of them runs. One was a touchdown run by Blake Corum, and the other one was a pass by J.J. McCarthy, a gutsy call. He called a halfback pass by Donovan Edwards at a critical point in the game. I just thought he was on point. He was aggressive and did a great job of not only leading the team in Jim Harbaugh's absence, but calling a masterful game.
So you made the point, Nicole Auerbach, our college football insider, if you follow her on Twitter, she definitely has a lot of insightful things to say. I thought she made the same point, and it's 100% correct, because in many situations when you're filling in for a guy like Jim Harbaugh, a lot of the tendencies would be just to be very, all right, we're going to manage the game. We're going to be very conventional in how we do it. We're going to rely on what we do. to your point, he was aggressive and he understood what was at stake. He understood what they needed to do to defeat a team and a defense that had played so well. And look, there's a lot that could happen from now into next season and beyond. If Jim Harbaugh were to leave the program, if he were to go to the NFL, I think a lot of people were already looking at Sharon Moore as one of the guys or one of the candidates that be in that running. I think he sealed that fate, that whenever Jim Harbaugh does decide to leave, if that happens, Sharon Moore is there and he's ready to become the next head coach, because it wasn't even just how he handled the play calling. It wasn't even how he called the game overall. It wasn't his demeanor. I thought it was how he handled the moment entirely. Because think about any coach, any young coach. This is a guy who's 37 years old, running out onto the field, getting interviewed pregame, all the juices that are flowing. We saw the emotion he had after the Penn State win. To see how much he's matured already in the 3 weeks, I think has been just as impressive as anything as well.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind, and I know this because my dad was an offensive line coach for years and years. It's it's one of the hardest positions to coach because you've got 5 guys playing and they have to be on the same page and in orchestra and in cohesion. And so he's also the offensive line coach. Now I'm sure he's gotten help, with some other people on the staff as he's taken over the head coaching role, but he still wants to have input with his offensive linemen. And here's the other thing that stood out to me. And again, I'm not saying that Michigan is a tougher team than Ohio State. I think the last 2 years, I thought they were better and more physical in the line of scrimmage. I thought it was more of a toss-up this year. I really thought Ohio State came to play and they were physical, but Michigan was just a little better. And, when they won at Penn State and we saw Blake Corum at the end of the game with the blood on his nose and, he looked like he came out of, what was the movie? He
looked like a gladiator, right?
Yeah, Gladiator. What was the other one that Mel Gibson was in?
Braveheart.
Braveheart. Yeah, it looked like he's from Braveheart, right? So anyway, that epitomized him and that team and their toughness. In this game, such a tragic moment when Zach Zinter got hurt. One of the guys that came back for this moment to play in that game, could have been a first-round draft pick last year, comes back and suffers a gruesome injury. One that's so bad they won't even show the replay of it. I just read the account where Carson Barnhart, the right tackle, was holding his limp foot, as the trainers were coming out. Yeah. And even the Ohio State defensive linemen were moved and concerned. And, there was just that moment of sportsmanship that was incredible, but just a huge loss for Michigan, right? And the very next play, Blake Corum runs 22 yards for a touchdown and flashes the 6'5", for his fallen teammate. To me, again, I love the kid. I love Blake Corum. I've loved covering him, getting to know him, watching him play, watching how unselfish he is. And to me, that epitomized Michigan again in that game and in this season.
No question. Real quick on the Ohio State side, obviously disappointment for Ryan Day. If you watch the interviews that Fox did with him before this game, leading up to it, you could tell how much it meant to him. You knew how much it meant to the team. To your point, they played very well. They put themselves in positions to potentially win the game, to drive it down the field at the end of the game and get a touchdown to win it. They're not done here. No. There's a chance, like similar to last year, it feels eerily similar in a lot of ways. If things break right, because let's just think about last year for a second. If USC beats Utah in the Pac-12 championship, there's a real good chance they get in over Ohio State last year into the college football playoff. I think it's similar this year, right? Where you look at, what goes on in the Pac-12? What happens in the ACC championship? What happens in a variety of these conferences or the SEC championship certainly as well, especially what happened in the Iron Bowl. Ohio State's going to need some things to fall in their place, but there's a chance they get in. And if they get in, based on how much better their defense is this year, they have as good a chance to win the entire thing as anybody in the country.
Yeah, I think so. Now, I do think that they're going to need a lot of help this year. They're going to need 3 or 4 things to happen, that would break their way. But that doesn't take away from what kind of team they have. And, I thought their running game got better when Travion Henderson got healthy. That touchdown drive they had in the third quarter to tie the game up, it was primarily done just pounding the football right at Michigan's defense and running with toughness and strength. And the only thing that I would say is I think Marvin Harrison had 5 catches for 118 yards and a touchdown. I would have tried to find a way for him to have 10 catches in the game. He was the best player on the field, and I feel like in some ways he was kind of underutilized in the game.
Makes sense. All right, let's move on because we'll probably get back to this towards the end as we look ahead towards the college football playoff, which is nearing very rapidly as we get towards these conference championship games. Just hit our game. Penn State beats Michigan State. It really wasn't all that close, 42-0. Penn State finishes with 10 wins on the season, and Drew Aller probably looked the best since week 1, maybe, at 292 yards, a couple of touchdowns to his 2 tight ends. Both Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton go for 100+ on the ground. This was a nice way to finish the season for Penn State and look, an end to a really difficult season for Michigan State on the other side.
Yeah, kind of a merciful end, for Michigan State. I mean, they were dominated in this game. Probably, the score wasn't as bad as when they lost to Michigan earlier, 49-0, but this was total domination. 586 yards of offense for Penn State, 53 total yards for Michigan State when it was all said and done. They actually lost yardage in the second half. And Penn State's defense played the way they've played all year, aggressive, attacking, flying around, 7 sacks, 12 tackles for loss. And it was probably, you're right, it's probably the best, most complete game that Penn State has played all season, where the offense matched the production and the effectiveness of the defense. So, they should get a good bowl game. I don't know. There's a good chance it'll be a New Year's Six bowl. But, if Ohio State does not get in the college football playoff, which is pretty likely, they're going to get one of those. And then it's just a matter if there's another one in another spot for another Big Ten team like Penn State.
They're certainly deserving of it just on their defense alone. Manny Diaz has done just such a wonderful job in his 2 years as defensive coordinator, and they've got studs really on both sides of the ball, but especially on the defensive side. And Chop Robinson, Manny Diaz told us he believes and wholeheartedly believes he's the best defensive player in the Big Ten, and he played like it again on Friday. And then you talk about a couple of really good defenses. The earlier game from Black Friday of Iowa and Nebraska.
Right.
I don't know if defensive battle does it justice, although I will say there were some explosive plays in the first half, and I think everyone was losing their mind saying, whoa, this isn't what I signed up for. This over-under total was 25 and a half, and they had 20 points early in the third quarter, and then they didn't score until the final seconds when Marshall Meter made his first kick of the season for Iowa to win it. Iowa wins 10 games as well. A remarkable season for Kirk Ferentz and the Hawkeyes, and a really disappointing end for Matt Rule in Nebraska.
Yeah, again, you saw the emotion in the post-game interview with Kirk Ferentz. This has been how often do you go through a season where you win 10 games, you win the Big Ten West, you're in Indianapolis for the second time in 3 years, and your offensive coordinator and son gets fired, not by you, but by people above you. Just an impressive win for them. And look, that's the difference over the last several years between Iowa and Nebraska. Iowa is very comfortable and very confident in winning games like that.
Yes.
And if you want to call it winning ugly or winning, whatever, however you want to describe it.
Uniquely.
But they know how to win games like that. Nebraska, on the other hand, and this is not all Matt Rule, this kind of loss looked so much like most of his the losses under Scott Frost. Since 2021, Nebraska is 3-18 in games decided by one score. That is something that Matt Rule has to change. It's almost like there's a curse on their program when it comes to those kind of close games. But if you don't learn how to win those kind of games, you're going to be in for it, because a lot of games against a team like Iowa, against a team like Illinois, those games are going to come down to being able to win it in the fourth quarter.
It's almost hard to fathom that stat is correct. It 100% is. And look, Matt Rule was honest with us a couple of weeks ago and said I think he thinks the players are starting to get over that idea that they could be cursed, and they're starting to think that they can win those games. But seeing is believing, and the hope is that next season they do take that next step. Certainly Chubba Purdy looked, again, very solid, but he had some mishaps and some fumbles that plagued that quarterback position pretty much all season. So a tough finish. They were 5-3. They will not be bowling this year. Your prediction falls by the wayside. You were looking good. It was looking real strong.
Yeah. I felt really good about it for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. You're right there. And honestly, Matt Rule, I think we both agree what he's building there is certainly something substantial, and it's going to come to fruition at some point in time here.
Yeah. And, when I made that prediction, I also at that time did not think or consider that they were going to lead the nation in giving the ball away either. So I mean, the combination of needing to play better in the fourth quarter and taking care of the football, that's what needs to be addressed in the offseason. I think the attitude is good. I think the direction is good, but those are two main areas that need to be cleaned up going forward.
Other Big Ten scores: Purdue over Indiana, so a win for Ryan Walters to finish the season. Hudson Card, another stellar game to finish the season. 275 and 3 touchdowns. Northwestern got another win here.
I mean,
we're talking about a Northwestern team that won one game last year and is more than just bowl eligible. They're saying, all right, let's exceed the bowl eligibility here. They beat Illinois 45-43 in an offensive explosion for those two teams. Wisconsin over Minnesota, 28-14. So that's 22 consecutive years of winning records for that Wisconsin program, which is remarkable. And Maryland finishes strong, and Talia Tagovailoa finishes as the all-time Big Ten passing yards leader after 361 through the air in the 42-24 win over Rutgers. So overall, it's a Big Ten season that had a variety, a mixed bag of results. Some disappointment for Maryland, but they do get victory to finish the season. Wisconsin, similar type of deal, where maybe disappointing to that fan base, but they get to 7 wins. They get to another winning season. Disappointing certainly for Illinois, especially considering it felt like they had an upward trajectory, but really impressive stuff for David Braun and Northwestern. They deserve a ton of credit. And now it'll be curious to see what it looks like moving forward for Purdue. Has Hudson Card figured it out? Has Ryan Walters figured it out as a head coach? So some interesting things for this final week.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And also, obviously, beyond this, I mean, the league is going to be completely different next year, and, the addition of the 4 teams from the Pac-12, which is no more, the elimination of divisions in the Big Ten. So it's going to be a very different league next year. And I think going to be incredibly competitive. But yeah, some teams in the league finished with some real positive momentum. And you use that to take into, if you get to play in a bowl game, those are extra practice days. It's almost like another spring practice. If you don't make a bowl game, as you start your winter conditioning and going into spring ball, you try to keep some of that momentum that you finished the year with.
Real quick, just a preview of the Big Ten championship game. We've got Michigan and Iowa from Indianapolis. It's easy to say that Iowa doesn't get blown out because they really don't. Aside from the Penn State game, they were in every game. They won all but 2 of them, and they were a Cooper DeJean fair catch call away from going 11-1. And so you can say Iowa doesn't get blown out because of that defense. They've got the 7th best total defense, just allowing 280 yards per game, 4th best scoring defense in the FBS. All the top 4 were Big Ten teams. And a big reason was, Michigan, they are arguably the best defense in the country, or certainly in the conversation. It's going to be really difficult, it feels like, for Iowa to move the football, and this is going to be a lot of field position. If they can truly play that punting as winning game and get Torrey Taylor to pin Michigan deep and find a way to stop them deep in their own territory. But it's a tall task ahead for the Hawkeyes against one of the most complete football teams in the country.
Yeah, and that's the key right there. I mean, Iowa stays in football games and competes because of their defense, because of their special teams, and in spite of their offense, right? But Michigan is great on both sides of the ball. I mean, they are outstanding on defense and outstanding on offense. And so they will provide a challenge for Iowa that they've not faced this year. The best offense that I think Iowa faced all year was Penn State. And Penn State was not anywhere near as complete or consistent as either Ohio State or Michigan, right? So Iowa didn't play either one of those teams. When they went up to Happy Valley and played in the whiteout game, they got smoked 31-0. And so I'm not saying that Iowa will get blown out, but it's just as you said, an incredibly tall task because Michigan is a very, very complete football team. And even if you say, okay, we're going to stop Blake Corum, well, then now you got to deal with J.J. McCarthy, not only his throwing ability, but also his ability to extend plays and do things with his legs. So a very, very difficult assignment for Iowa.
So long as Michigan gets through, which many expect to happen, they will be in the college football playoff. And the biggest thing I think that comes from that is allowing J.J. McCarthy to get healthy, because that's been among, if there were any questions about Michigan, and he looked a little better last week than maybe he did the week prior against Maryland, but he's still not 100%. I think you can see it when you watch him play. And when he is 100%, that's what it feels like unlocks this team into what their full potential is. Because we saw it earlier in the season. A couple of the games we did, he looked like a completely different player. He looked like a completely different confidence level was there, comfortability level was there, command and control of what he wanted to do. And I just don't know if he's felt like he's had his full arsenal, especially with his legs, these last couple of weeks. So those couple of weeks leading into what would be the college football playoff for McCarthy and Michigan, to me, that could be as important as anything.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I do think he looked really good Saturday. I think he looked much better than he did against Penn State or Maryland. But and let's go back to Sharon Moore again. Another brilliant move that he used in this game, in their opening drive of the third quarter, knowing that maybe his quarterback J.J. McCarthy was not completely ready to run the football. He puts Alex Orji in at quarterback and runs design quarterback run 2 plays in a row. The first time it goes for 20 yards, clearly surprised the Ohio State defense. But that was a brilliant coaching move as well, inserting a new quarterback at that moment in the game for a big play that sparked their offense.
Yeah, very good point. As we move to the SEC, we'll start with Georgia. They will remain number 1 in the country. They beat Georgia Tech. They went down early in this game, but they come back, and then they just kind of look like Georgia. 31-23. They were up a couple scores for the majority down the stretch of the second half. Georgia Tech outscored Georgia 10-0 in the fourth, but it felt like this game was somewhat in control. No Brock Bowers, out with the ankle injury again. Ladd McConkey out with the ankle. Thomas out with a foot sprain. Tate Rutledge was held out as well with a knee injury. So they were missing some firepower, and they still find a way. Carson Beck, perfect in his first season as a starter through the regular season. Now the big test ahead with Alabama. But they needed to get this win. You mentioned rivalry week. Weird things happen. This is a rivalry game. Georgia Tech, this was their Super Bowl to finish the season, and Georgia found a way to win the game.
Yeah, and I think that's all that matters. They're playing without some of their weapons on offense. I don't think Georgia doesn't need style points. They don't need to blow somebody out. They just needed to do enough to win that game on the road in Atlanta, and now they'll be back in Atlanta a week later, and all eyes will be on that one when they square off against Alabama.
Yeah, talk about just finding a way to win a game. Let's talk about the Iron Bowl here, because, all right, you
can't even make this up. I mean, you can't make up. I mean, the Iron Bowl historically is filled with like crazy plays, in the history. And sometimes the games, based on what happened, that's how the game is referred to. I mean, it's a name. It's punt, Bama punt was one. It was the kick six. I don't know what the name for this one's going to be.
I think that I had heard the Milrow Miracle, maybe the Milrow Miracle. I think that could work.
Yeah. But I mean, think about this now. So Auburn, the week before, gets beat by 21 points by New Mexico State.
Yes.
Right, at home in a game where they paid New Mexico State to come and play. And so now they go in the Iron Bowl. And I think I said last week, I knew Auburn would play better, because the Iron Bowl it's different, man. I mean, it doesn't matter what the records are, and there's been a lot of upsets where the higher seeded or higher ranked team gets beat in the Iron Bowl. So Auburn plays lights out. They got a 27-24 lead, all the way till late. And Alabama mounts this drive. All right. And everybody's going to remember this play, 4th and 31, which was so improbable and so ridiculous. But Alabama had a 1st and goal on the 7th.
Yeah.
And went backwards 3 plays in a row to set up 4th and 31. I mean, they put themselves in that position, right, because of negative plays, a bad snap, a penalty, quarterback crossing the line of scrimmage. That wasn't a real miraculous play by him. But then on 4th and 31, and really, he threw that ball. There was only one spot on the field that he could throw the ball to hope to get a completion. It was single coverage, but I mean, the guy was backed into the corner of the end zone. Bond, the receiver, Isaiah Bond, and Jalen Milroe put it in the exact perfect spot for the catch.
Yeah, he dropped it in the bucket. And so, yes, you can say, obviously, the Iron Bowl is the Iron Bowl. It's always going to have stuff. But I for whatever reason, it feels like when it's at Jordan-Hare in particular,
yeah,
like, why does wacky stuff only happen at Jordan-Hare all the time? It just, there's something in the air. There's something with all the stuff, what's underneath the fields. There's something going on there that's wacky. And I don't
know and really that didn't start until I'd have to go back and check the year. But for years and years, Alabama would not go and play at Jordan-Hare. They played the game in Birmingham at Legion Field. And then when they started going home and home, that was a huge deal for Auburn people that they would finally get to have that game at home. And so, ever since they started doing that, there's been some crazy, crazy happenings.
But it's I'm saying, even not even just in this matchup, like the prayer at Jordan-Hare was Georgia, right?
Where, Georgia,
It's just weird stuff that happens at that stadium. I don't know what it is. There's something in the air. There's something under the field. That's all I'm going to say. All right. Very, very impressive. Great finish to the game. Alabama stays very much alive now. And if they can win in the SEC championship, they put themselves in an outstanding position to be in that top 4 at the end of the season. Also in the SEC, Ole Miss in the Egg Bowl on Thursday, they get the victory. And how about the finish of the season for Mizzou? 48-14 over Arkansas, and that was in Fayetteville. That was a statement to finish what was a resurgent season for the Tigers.
Yeah. And maybe the best player that nobody's ever heard of, Cody Schrader, the running back, 27 carries, 217 yards. He's probably going to be the leading rusher in the SEC. He's sitting at 1,489 yards right now, 13 touchdowns. He was a former walk-on transfer from Truman State. I don't even know where Truman State is. And he's had this incredible season in leading this Missouri offense. And they're legit. I mean, they were a legit inside the top 10 team and should be playing in a really, really nice bowl game as well.
I know the Truman Show. I don't know.
Right.
So I'm gonna just stick with that. Matt Lamb, our producer, tells us Truman State is in Missouri, so it fits the mold well. So now we do hit the SEC championship, and it's this Georgia-Alabama matchup yet again. And they've played some classics. We know that. Alabama, just to put themselves in this position, has been impressive considering the way the season started and the way that it looked like it was going to go. And Jalen Milroe gets benched early in the season, and then he comes back and has really just gotten better every week.
Yeah.
On the other side, you can say a lot of the same with Carson Beck and this Georgia team, where early in the season, I think a lot of people are saying, all right, this isn't the same Georgia team that we've seen the last 2 years. And maybe that's true in some ways, but they're dang close. And I think that we've seen that, especially in the last month of the season here. So they're both playing their best football as we head to Atlanta.
They are. I think it'll be very important, and hopefully for Georgia's sake, that they were just holding those guys out, Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers, Tate Ratledge, as precautionary measures so that they could be healthy for this game, because they're going to need all of their resources in this game. I still think Georgia is probably a better team, a little bit more consistent team. And you've got 2 quarterbacks that are both first-year starters, and they do it differently, but they both have been really effective. And I think which one of those 2 guys takes care of the ball best in this game is probably going to decide the outcome. I think turnovers potentially will be the thing that turns the tide in this game. Not trying to make a play on words.
The tide.
It will affect the game the most.
Last note to throw in there about the SEC. Jaden Daniels just pads his stats a little further here. 235 yards in the air, 4 touchdowns, had 120 on the ground. LSU beats A&M 42-30. So he puts himself in prime position for that Heisman conversation.
Yeah, he absolutely does, and I think that he has a great chance of winning it. The only thing is he is done, and the guy that he's probably a little bit behind right now are guys, Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. They get to square off one more time on Friday night in a Pac-12 championship game, which will be a huge TV audience, and so that's a real advantage. It's a real advantage for Bo Nix in particular, because I think Bo Nix has kind of moved ahead of Michael Penix Jr. Michael Penix Jr. has had a few games where it's not big numbers. However, Washington is undefeated and, had a great win in their rivalry game this past weekend. But I think it really, at this point, is Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels for that award. And Bo Nix gets one more time to show his stuff.
Well, you brought up the Pac-12. I was going to go to the ACC. Let's just hit on the Pac-12 since we're on it already. So Oregon over Oregon State. Convincing fashion, and I think that's the key in all. It's a good football team. Now there could have been some distractions. The rumor is, and it sounds like it's official, considering Michigan State's already put out a lot of stuff. But Jonathan Smith is going to be the next head coach of the Spartans. So you don't know what's going on. You don't know what those conversations were like heading into that game. All is to say, Oregon gets the job done in a big way, 31-7 on Friday. And Bo Nix had 367 yards and 3 total touchdowns. Meanwhile, Washington, it wasn't as simple against Washington State. And that Apple Cup is always a tricky one anyway, but 24-21 is the final score as the Huskies hang on. Grady Gross earns a scholarship. Their kicker.
Yeah, that was cool.
The game-winning field goal. It was really awesome. I love those videos anyway when the coach, goes nuts. But Kalen DeBoer, basically just throws him the lob, and then Grady Gross gets mobbed by his teammates. It was really cool to see in the locker room. Roma Dunze still he produces every week. I mean, the kid's an absolute stud. So you can go through and really talk about either of these games, but all it's going to lead to is what you just said, and that's this matchup in the Pac-12 championship, which I think is a matchup a lot of people were hoping we would get another look at after what happened earlier in the season. Washington squeaked past Oregon, but it was at Washington. It was in Seattle. And so I think that now you've got a neutral site game. You go to Vegas. You've got these two teams both playing at a high level, but it feels like Oregon's got this revenge on the mind, and it feels like they've been playing and operating at a slightly higher level since that game to finish out the season.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think Oregon has been very dominant looking ever since that loss. It was a 36-33 game when they lost in Seattle back on October 14th. And I think that they have played in a very dominant fashion since then, probably more dominant than Washington has. Now, Washington's won all their games. They've found a way to win, and there's something to be said for that. Yeah. And I still think it's going to be a great matchup. But I think Oregon has played better since that loss than Washington has. But going back to the Washington game, we just got done talking about the 4th and 31 play. We talked about Sharon Moore going for 4th down 3 times and being successful. The 4th and 1 play that Kalen DeBoer not only called from his own 29-yard line, but the way they executed it was unbelievable. Maybe the guttiest 4th down call of the season, maybe one I've seen anywhere. There was 1:11 left.
Yeah.
It's 4th and 1 on his own 29. The game is tied, okay? And I think, first of all, he sent his punt team out to see if they could get a hard count and get a free 1st down. Washington State didn't bite, so he calls timeout, and he sends his offense back out with a play that was basically a triple option concept. So Michael Penix Jr. had the option of handing it to the dive back, keeping it himself, or flipping it back, which is always a dangerous play, to Roma Dunze on a orbit sweep, and it caught the Washington State defense completely flat-footed, and he ends up running 23 yards for the 1st down. And a few plays later, they kicked the walk-off field goal to win the game. But that call, not only the fact that he made the call, but the design of the play that he saved for that moment, incredible by Kalen DeBoer. And what a way for Washington to win that game at home.
We've already said it, and I'm just going to hit on it because obviously this is big talk with Todd and Noah. The 4 coaches that are now joining the Big Ten, again, I'm glad to see that Chip Kelly is likely going to be returning at UCLA because I believe that he's a part of this. Well, you've got Chip Kelly, Lincoln Riley, but especially now those two with Dan Lanning and Kalen DeBoer. Think about the coaches you're adding to the Big Ten. Already a league that's filled with outstanding coaches, and certainly some that have started to build their identities with Matt Rule and Luke Fickell and Ryan Walters and company,
Right.
and David Braun, what he's done at Northwestern. But already with Ryan Day is someone who's got 7 losses in 6 seasons essentially as a head coach. Jim Harbaugh, should he stay, or Sharon Moore, based on what we just saw. James Franklin, another 10-win season, 5 times in the last 8 seasons. And you go down the list and you're adding these 4 coaches. It just the Big Ten is going to be so much fun moving forward. Kalen DeBoer, I got to look at what his overall record is now because it's similar to Ryan Day. Like, he's been coaching longer as a head coach, and he's got, like, let's say he's been coaching a decade or maybe more. He's got like 8 total losses or 9 total losses. It's something crazy. And all he does is win football games. And Dan Lanning, coming from the pedigree he has, just very exciting. I get very excited anytime I look at it and think about it. So very cool stuff. Anyway, let's before we move on and all the way forward to the Big 12, let's go back to the ACC. Florida State, mentioned it off the top. They finished the regular season with an unbeaten record, 24-15 over Florida. Obviously, it's their first game completely now without their everything quarterback. And yet Tate Rodemaker not only came in, took a major hit, had to go off to the sideline, came back and made some big plays down the stretch. He leads them to a win. Trey Benson had 95 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. They win 24-15. And the team they're playing in the ACC championship, Louisville, falters on the final week of the season. They lose to Kentucky again, 38-31. They were locked into that ACC title game anyway.
Right.
But it makes it a little less intriguing. And now I'm curious, and you can hit on these 2 games before you answer the question, but I'm curious if Louisville does beat Florida State, what does that look like for both these teams now towards the end of the season? Because it feels like Florida State has to win. They have no choice but to win the ACC championship if they want to get in the college football playoff. And now Louisville, if they had the 1 loss, you could have at least said, all right, do they deserve to be talked about? Now with the 2 losses, it feels like they've completely fallen off of any sort of conversation.
Yeah, I don't think Florida State has to win to have a shot. And I honestly think even without their starting quarterback, Jordan Travis, if they win, if they find a way to get to 13-0, they deserve to be in the college football playoff, even with a backup quarterback, because they've earned that through the course of this season. They were down 12-0 early in this game on the road in the swamp, backup quarterback, and they gutted it out. They found a way to win. The running of Benson, their defense. Now, granted, Florida was playing without their starting quarterback, Graham Mertz, as well. However, it still is a rivalry game and a good win for Florida State. And if they take care of business in Charlotte against Louisville, then they should be in the college football playoff.
No doubt. Interesting stuff. ACC is always interesting, as is, but Florida State, the resurgence, very impressive. We saw it last year. I think a lot of people question what they would look like this year to finish the season unbeaten, and certainly without Jordan Travis in this final game is commendable for what FSU has done this season. And now the Big 12 title game is decided. Oklahoma State beats BYU in double overtime, 40-34. That means they've got Texas, who was in regardless. They had run the table after their loss to Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry, and Oklahoma had fallen a couple of times. Kansas State's lost to Iowa State on Saturday. So that's what seals this fate for Oklahoma State. Ollie Gordon, another big-time game, 166 yards and 5 touchdowns. He just had a ridiculous season for Oklahoma State. And so it's Texas and OK State after Texas just throttles Texas Tech 57-7. Oklahoma did beat TCU to finish the season 69-45. So this feels similar in many ways. Texas is very much in the conversation here. They've got to take care of business. They lose in the Big 12 title game, their hopes are over. But similar to Ohio State, they need a couple things to break their way. But it's definitely very much within reach for this Longhorn team. And a lot of credit to them for the way that they've handled themselves after the loss to Oklahoma to run the table the rest of the way and put themselves in this position.
Yeah, I mean, Texas, look, they're one of 8 teams that still have some viable path to the playoffs, right? Which is the most that we've ever had at this point, going into championship games of the weekend. I think Texas, they don't need as much to happen as Ohio State does, but they need a lot. And I think they are probably going to be the best team that is left out. Because and here's a couple things. I mean, look at their resume. First of all, they're playing great football. It's the best offense and defensive line combination that Texas has had in a long time. It's the first time they've won this many games since 2009. They have a resume win over Alabama already. Their only loss was in the Red River game to a 10-win Oklahoma team. They have gotten better and better since that loss. The thing that's going to hurt Texas more than anything, obviously they have to win the game, but the fact that Oklahoma State as an opponent in the Big 12 championship game doesn't give a lot of sizzle to the result. You know, it's a 3-loss team that kind of, you know, found their way through overtime. They were down 18 points in the first half and came back and won the game in crazy fashion. And so Texas, you know, it would have been better if they'd have had maybe even a rematch with a 10-win Oklahoma team would have been better from a perception than anything else. But Texas is going to have a great year and they'll play in a great bowl game, but I think it's going to be really difficult for them to make it in the college football playoff.
So before we get into big connections, I just want to lay out what we think the college football playoff scenario looks like heading into championship weekend. It feels like 3 of the spots are going to be taken. Now, that's assuming Michigan wins over Iowa, which I think is expected. And then the way I look at it, at least, the winner of the SEC championship is going to be in regardless. Now, if that's Georgia, they're in. If it's Alabama, maybe both of them get in, but that's a deeper discussion. But at least one of them will be there, and it's going to be the winner of the game. And then the winner of the Pac-12 championship game feels like they're going to be in regardless. Now, the loser will be out, I would say, and that's going to be a tough pill for Washington to swallow if that's the case, with only the 1 loss and Oregon jumping them. But that's just what the situation calls for. So it feels like all these teams that we're saying are right on the bubble, the Texas, the Ohio State, and beyond that of the 8, it feels like that's who's fighting for 1 spot here. And it depends on what happens. Because, again, if Alabama, let's say, wins the SEC championship game, Georgia still has a very viable case to say, all right, we should still be in there. We've won the last 2. We ran the table in the regular season. If it's a close game in the SEC championship, you can point to that. You can point to your point to maybe some of the opponents of some of the other teams. If it is Georgia, now you leave that other spot. You've got all these other situations that you need to happen. But it really only feels like there's 1 spot up for grabs as a wild card from a different conference or a second team from one of these other conferences.
Yeah, I think that's right. Again, it's going to be, you know, the committee's going to have some difficult decisions to make, you know, because if the favorites win this weekend, which there's no guarantee as we see week in and week out. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the winner of the, you know, if Michigan wins, they're going to be in. If Georgia wins, they're going to be in. If Florida State wins, they're going to be in. All right. And so then it's just a matter of, and I really think, you know, not just because I'm not saying this is like sympathy points for the Pac-12, you know, there's no more Pac-12. And no, the Pac-12 has been great this year, right? The teams have been good. These quarterbacks have been amazing, and they've been highly ranked all year. So I do think the winner of that game is going to get one of the spots. And there hasn't been, you know, the playoffs started in 2014. Oregon was in it that year. Washington made it in 2016. There has not been a Pac-12 team in the college football playoffs since then. 7 years, longest drought of any of the Power 5 conferences. So it's about time. And I think whoever wins that game would deserve to be in the college football playoff. Now, you know, what really will make it the most challenging for the committee and the most interesting is if Alabama beats Georgia in the SEC championship game. Because you're right, they will not make Georgia stay home. If Alabama wins, then you're going to have 2 teams from the SEC taking up 2 spots. And again, Michigan, if they win, they definitely are going to be in. Then there's 1 spot with some serious competition for.
Essentially, what we're saying with Ohio State, for all the things they need to happen here, they need Florida State to lose.
Correct.
They need Texas to lose. They need Alabama to lose in all of their conference championship games. And if all of that happens, they will have their chance potentially to get in. And it still won't be a guarantee at that point. Right. Because the committee might then value a 1-loss conference championship runner-up from the Pac-12 or one of these other teams over the top of them, Texas with a signature win. But at least with a one loss from Ohio State, if they can get all of those other teams to lose in front of them, that to me feels like where maybe now they get to snag that number 4 spot and get in there again.
Yeah. Yep. It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
Another good weekend of championship games coming up.
Well, Todd, everyone says the most wonderful time of the year is Christmas, but I'd argue that it's championship weekend. I don't know. It's a tough one. It's a toss-up as we lead into our Xfinity Big Connections on and off the field, a rematch of the 2021 Big Ten championship game. Iowa and Michigan going toe-to-toe. Michigan leads the all-time series 44-15-4. They've only met in the championship game one time 2 years ago, and that was number 3 Michigan over number 23 Iowa, 42-3. Michigan had 461 total yards in that game, and Blake Corum, Roman Wilson each had a touchdown. I would say that's a trend that easily could continue. Certainly Blake Corum, it feels like, is a guarantee every week to get in the end zone somehow. He's got over 20 on the season. He's been a machine. Donovan Edwards had a passing touchdown in this game in the first quarter. Cade McNamara was still starting at that point. And think about this. Cade McNamara had a touchdown to Eric All.
Right.
Both of them are on the Iowa football roster. Now, both of them are out with season-ending injuries for Iowa.
Right.
But both of them at the time were playing for Michigan and allowed for the Wolverines to have the 42-3 victory. But we talked about this game. Always interesting to see the connections, certainly within the Big Ten.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? One thing about Iowa, too, and they struggle on offense. I mean, there's no question about that. But it is amazing to me, how certain positions are identified with schools, wide receivers at Ohio State here and Alabama, linebackers at Penn State and some other places, tight ends at Iowa.
Yeah.
You think about it, they lost their best 2 tight ends this year, and they're still producing from that position. And you look around the NFL, and there's former Iowa Hawkeye tight ends playing at a high level. So it's pretty impressive. But this matchup, again, it's going to be a tall task for them. Phil Parker, I think, is one of the best defensive coaches and coordinators ever to come down the pike in college football.
Great.
And he'll have the great plan and he'll have them ready, but you're dealing with the 2-headed monster with Michigan's offense. Their ability to throw the football with J.J. McCarthy and Roman Wilson and those tight ends, Colston Loveland, and their ability to run with that offensive line of Blake Corum, and then J.J. McCarthy's ability to extend play. So this will be the best offense and the most challenging offense that Iowa has faced all year.
Yeah, and the Hawkeyes, of course, without their best player, Cooper DeJean, who is out for the year with his own injury. So will be a fun watch regardless. It's always fun to watch these teams go to work and watch these defenses go toe-to-toe. Just some last things to hit on. Audric Estime had over 230 yards, 238 to be exact, 4 touchdowns. Notre Dame finishes strong over Stanford with a victory, 56-23. And then a shout-out to Liberty, finishes the season undefeated, 12-0, 42-28 over UTEP. They've got New Mexico State for the Conference USA title on Friday as well.
Yeah, a couple other ones that I'll throw out there too, along the same vein. James Madison, who we've talked about, right? They came back from their loss to Appalachian State. They beat Coastal Carolina, who's a good football program, 56-14. They finished 11-1, and they are actually going to get to play in a bowl game now because there's not enough teams that have the right record or enough wins. So they are going to get in, as well as Jacksonville State, who has had a really good year. And I think Rich Rod is the head coach at Jacksonville State.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he is. So bowl game for them as well. And then the other team that I want to shout out to, actually it's 2, but one in particular, the group of 5 representative in a New Year's 6 bowl is probably going to be the winner of this week's American Athletic Conference championship game. Okay. And it's number 23 Tulane, who under Willie Fritz has just been great the last few years. Remember, they beat USC in a Cotton Bowl last year, played in a New Year's 6. They're in line to do it again. They're 11-1, 8-0 in the conference, and they'll take on SMU, who's 10-2 and 8-0, and they'll play that game in New Orleans this weekend. So the winner of that game, in all likelihood, will be in a New Year's 6 bowl as well.
Very, very worthy shout outs. Other things, just coaching news around. We mentioned Jonathan Smith. It sounds like going to East Lansing. Mike Elko is going to head to College Station to be the next head coach of Texas A&M. Jimbo Fisher, of course, let go. We've sung his praises, rightfully so, for what he's done at Duke. Just remarkable the last couple of years. They finished the season 7-5 this year, but Riley Leonard getting hurt somewhat derailed what was a really promising season in many ways. They finished the year with a victory over Pitt. They were ranked in the top 25 a couple of times. And of course, Mike Elko already with some connections to A&M. So yeah, it'll be a fun homecoming for him. And I'm very curious what that'll look like moving forward. I'm also curious what a lot of these programs, what the expectation will be moving forward, especially now in the SEC, you've got Texas and Oklahoma coming in the Big Ten for Michigan State. You've got those 4 programs from the West Coast. Any of these Big 12 schools, you've got some of those Pac-12 coming in. So what are the expectations for some of these schools? But we know that Mike Elko is one hell of a football coach. It'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, it will be. And he gets A&M, the fact that he was there and was successful there after he came from Notre Dame. And so he understands what A&M is about, and he understands what those expectations are. And, I think he will bring a toughness and a ruggedness and a defense first mentality. I'm not sure what he'll do as far as who his offensive coordinator will be. But again, to me, Texas A&M is a sleeping giant. The resources that they have, the facilities they have, the support, the fan base, everything is there that they should be an elite championship program year in and year out. And they just have not been yet. But we'll see if Mike Elko can get it done.
We'll see if he can unlock it. All right, we've got one final episode at minimum next week where we will recap all of the conference championship games, certainly starting with the Big Ten between Michigan and Iowa. It's been a fun regular season that has come to a close with 14 episodes in. Hard to believe that we've made it all the way here, but we appreciate you for tuning in this week to Big Talk with Todd and Noah, presented by Xfinity 10G. Make sure you subscribe on NBC Sports YouTube channel and wherever you get your audio podcasts. And as always, we will talk to you